Thank you. And then we can have Alpana. You can give a presentation on your another graphic designer. So you want to say something? You don't have a PowerPoint? You have? Yes, okay, right here.
Before I start on my sort of planned presentation, I thought I'd quickly react to what was said this morning. And I think what is really, we as Indians have an inherent talent called jugaad, which is the basis of, we can make anything work. So I think maybe that's a good place for a good design philosophy to begin with, making things work. Anyway, I am talking from the other side. I think most of who've spoken today have been from the engineering, technical, product, industrial design area. And I'm, well, sort of in the same thing, but slightly different. And I've called my talk Linking Technology and the User, because I think that's essentially what a visual communicator does. So, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows, but sometimes it's important to reiterate what we actually do. And I think the basis of what a graphic designer does is organize structures and visual information to aid communication, whether it's about a product, a thought, a message, whatever. And this is some of the things where areas of graphic design that we all work in, which I think most people, some of these are much more technology oriented than others. Part of the issue that we face as communicators today is that we're so terribly dependent on technology, which is changing by the second. I mean, in my career, which sort of actually started in the 80s, we've gone from hot metal to, you know, something called e-ink, which is the thing of tomorrow. So we've had to force ourselves to rethink design at every stage in our lives. Because whether you like it or not, graphic design or any other design is completely linked to technology. And the way we think we have to rethink every half a decade or so. Because when we started, for example, today, even designing a font is quite different than what it was in the 70s. Today we read fonts differently. The way we perceive visual understanding, our perception of visual understanding has totally changed in the last 50 years or so. For example, you know, this is, even before, this is what a traditional newspaper, this is what we are looking at, most of us look at today is the web-based newspaper, and this is the technology of tomorrow where your newspaper will come to you with what's called e-ink, which will be transmitted to you by electronically, and your paper will change every day, but there's no delivery man, there's no. So basically what it means is we are also changing our skill sets. It's less dependency on hand skills, much more dependency on software understanding, and a far, far closer relationship between technology and design. Earlier, I think to go back a bit, earlier graphic design in particular was sort of somehow linked more with art, painting, uh, craft, and much less to do with technology. But the way I personally see it is if you had a scroll bar today, we are far more towards technology than towards the art. The arts and the has remained a constant. The basic tenets of aesthetics, arts, color, etc., have not changed. But what we're going towards, which is technology, has changed a great deal. So, and then again, now we have more emphasis on the user. It's much more to do with the market. It's less sort of self-expression, creativity, etc. as everybody today has said, it's much more collaborative than it ever was. It's much more multidisciplinary. And I know I keep saying this again because I face it every day. We are much more dependent on technology than ever. And we're much more worried about what's happening in the rest of the world. This I've just taken as an example of how, visual thinking has changed. This is something which we study called skeuomorphism, which is when, everybody who uses the iPad or phones or whatever, what you tried to do earlier was you tried to represent, say, an address book, to look like an address book. It had, the little symbol was that of a diary, or a phone looked like a phone. In today's day, where the next generation has never seen an address book, they've never seen a telephone which rings, as in a traditional. So our whole idea of symbols have also changed. So this is where one has to constantly reconnect with the changing world and interpret it differently for people to understand. This is what I was talking about. What is day? What is date? It's entirely different from what we perceived it earlier as symbols on your phone. What is sound? What is volume? What is an arrow? For example, in wayfinding systems, we've always used the arrow as a symbol of direction. How many people, children today, know what an arrow is? Unless they go to a museum. But it's still become a symbol, a visual symbol for which way to go. Similarly, if you look at your phone today, what is music? How many children know what? They probably know a year set better than they know a musical symbol. So every day with each, I think every 5 years or so with moving generation, you have to rethink the visual language. And then of course, as it is, whether we like it or not, technology, before you've learnt and mastered one software, you're thrown into the next. You're thrown into a next generation computer, you're thrown into a next. So we're constantly having to redesign to suit that kind. For example, typeface is one of the areas where we constantly have to change. What is valid for print design is no more valid for screen design. So basically I think in a sense what I'm saying is that now design and technology have become sort of partners. It's a symbiotic relationship. There is very little you can do without each other. While designers add the aesthetic. Oh, okay, fine. I'm doing fine. So temperature, something like temperature, these are all. So basically, what I'm saying is, to put it in a nutshell, in the 1900s, for example, beginning of last century, we were all pushed into the arts and aesthetics field as graphic designers. And today, I think we're heading closer towards technology, but with that basics that we've had. So that's something you can't leave behind. You can't leave behind the art and aesthetics and say, no, I'm a completely technical person. I still need that kind of training, which possibly, an engineer may not. It's like telling me to learn engineering as a designer. I'll never be able to do that. Or to tell an engineer you learn art and aesthetics. You could perhaps, in a bit, but I don't think it's possible for these two to ever merge into one being. So it will always be a symbiotic relationship, and I think even if you're thinking of putting them under one roof, it makes a bit of sense. Even though seems. Okay, so as Mr. Pitroda was saying, he might, where you'd never know where design leads you. You might have actually started by designing a cell phone, and you might end up with 100% literacy. So thank you. That's all I have.